So Merrick Garland, the memo that they released is so terrible, indicating that they're going to stick the Department of Justice and the FBI on parents who are just expressing their views, exercising their First Amendment right to express their views on matters of very important public concern, right, at school board meetings and elsewhere. And so for the federal government to characterize that as somehow illegal and to try to suppress it and to try to weaponize the Department of Justice and send them out to go after parents is wrong, and it violates constitutional rights.
I think Minnesotans are at the point where what happened last summer was pretty scary. It was chaos. One of the great cities in America, I believe, is I'm born and raised in Minnesota. And a great city and beautiful city is Minneapolis. It got destroyed, and it has a bad reputation. I talk to people outside of Minnesota that I know, and they're like, "Man, Minneapolis has gotten really violent. Minneapolis is crime-ridden," and that's a reputation that I don't want.
What we needed at the time, and what I would have done were I Attorney General then, is come out before the riot started or when you see them coming and send a strong message from the bully pulpit of the Attorney General's office that lawlessness will not be tolerated in Minnesota, that, protesting is fine, peaceful protesting is fine, but as soon as you break a window or break any law, then that crosses the line, and that's not okay, and law breaking will have consequences. And then you aggressively prosecute those who break the law, support law enforcement, give them all the resources that we should have called out the National Force, and then go through and prosecute those folks that have been arrested, and send that strong message that in Minnesota, if you're going to riot, if you're going to foment violence or unrest, you will face significant consequences. And that's what Keith Ellison did not do at all. I'm also general counsel at My Pillow, and so it's a Minnesota-based company, great company with just about 1,000 employees or somewhere around there. And so handling a lot of complex litigation matters and managing litigation. So I have the litigation management experience to really get into the AG's office, take it over, and start taking bold action on day one as well.
Hi guys, welcome to the Minnesota Uncensored podcast. Please check us out on YouTube and on Facebook, SD57 GOP Republicans. Also check us out on Stitcher, iHeartRadio, iTunes, and on Spotify. Please leave a review because I would love to give you some content that goes against the liberal mainstream media. We've got a great episode for you. Enjoy.
So I have with me here Attorney General candidate Doug Wardlow. How are you doing today, Doug?
Good, Tyler. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, no problem, man. How are you enjoying this? When did you exactly announce for this campaign for 2022? How long have you been into this campaign season so far?
I think we announced back in February, if I'm not mistaken. So we're coming up on a year, 10 months or so now.
What would you say about the first 10 months? How have you felt about it?
It's been fantastic. I mean, compared to 4 years ago, I ran for Attorney General last time and came very close to winning within about 3.5 points in what was a very difficult year for Republicans. We lost the governor's race and other top-of-the-ticket races by 11 points or more. So we did quite well, but it didn't quite get there. And now this time the political winds are at our back, and you can feel the energy out there, and it is tremendous. Turnout at events is much higher than 4 years ago. There are more events going on. People are just energized. They're fed up. They're excited for change. They want to move back the rule of law and law and order. And so we have a huge opportunity here. Things feel very good. We had a booth at the state fair, and it was fantastic. We had people come up to the booth who were Democrats saying, we're going to support your campaign because we're tired of the lawlessness. And a lot of apolitical folks coming up and saying things along the lines of, we don't usually vote, but this time we're gonna vote for you because we believe that you will restore law and order. We're tired of being afraid. So I think things are looking quite good, and it's been a good opening in 10 months or so of the campaign.
Exactly. I definitely agree with you. The wind at your back. Obviously, Minnesota has had a tough couple-year period when it comes to issues of law and order, and also just other issues that really affect people on a very fundamental level. Tell me a little bit about yourself, your story, where you're from, kind of your background, and what got you to place to run 4 years ago, and just to tell me a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. So I grew up in Eagan, and I'm the son of two public school teachers, two of the few conservative Republican public school teachers in the state. I know there are a lot of good Republican public school teachers, but a lot of times they don't announce themselves as such, right? Because they are few in number. They're outnumbered in teachers unions and whatnot. So raised by the two great parents. My dad is a Vietnam vet and is in the Marine Corps. And my mom, like I said, a public school teacher, and my brother is in the Marine Corps, and my grandfather, actually on my dad's side, his father was in the Army, and he actually was killed in World War II in Germany in 1945 when my dad was 17 months old. So from my family, I really learned the value of public service, but then also just how special our country is and how important it is that we work to preserve the freedoms that we have. And that was instilled in me at a very young age. I'm kind of black sheep because I'm the one who didn't go into the military like everybody else. And I went to law school, but I've learned, and I did that because I think law is a tool that we must use to maintain our freedoms and our constitutional republic. We need to keep an eye on what's happening to law. Keith Ellison, he's trying to turn law into a political weapon, and we've got to stop that. So that's kind of my background, upbringing, if you will. And then my wife, Jenny, and I, now we live in Prior Lake, and we've got 3 kids, Winston, Annabelle, and Martin, ages 11, 9, and 5. And they're the real reason I'm running, because I want them to be able to have a Minnesota that they can build productive lives in. I want them to be able to have Minnesota they can be proud of, right? And that's what really drives me, and that's what drove me to run for this office 4 years ago. And it's also what drove me to run for the Minnesota House back in 2010 from Egan at the time. And I won that race, defeated a Democrat incumbent, and fought hard for our conservative principles in the state House. Now in 2012, I ran again, was narrowly defeated. And Egan has been shifting quite quickly, shifting blue. And so now I think that district is pretty squarely in Democrat hands. The demographics have shifted, and a lot of things have changed in Egan that make it a pretty tough area for Republicans. So it was kind of coming in right when that shift was going on. But fought hard in the House for our conservative principles, and did beat a Democratic incumbent in 2010. And I think the political winds now are quite similar to what we saw in 2010. And so after serving in the state House, actually when I was serving in the state House, I was also practicing law. I went to Georgetown Law School and also Georgetown undergrad, and entered private practice. And I'm a constitutional lawyer. I spent a number of years working with Alliance Defending Freedom, which is a Christian nonprofit law firm that fights for religious liberty and free speech and our important constitutional rights in cases all across the country. And so I've dedicated my legal career to fighting for our most important constitutional rights. And I'll continue fighting for all Minnesotans' constitutional rights when I'm Attorney General, and that's critical. And so that's kind of the picture of my general background. I'm also general counsel at My Pillow, and so it's a Minnesota-based company, great company with just about 1,000 employees, or somewhere around there. And so handling a lot of complex litigation matters and managing litigation. So I have the litigation management experience to really get into the AG's office, take it over, and start taking bold action on day one as well. So that's kind of what led me in this direction. I just feel very strongly that we can't sit idly by and watch as our state descends into chaos and our constitutional rights are trampled by our government. And I have the ability to fight back, and I feel called to this, and I've prayed about it and thought about it a lot, prayed about it with my family. And we felt called to run 4 years ago, and felt called to run again because we came so close last time despite significant political headwinds, right? We actually got more votes than any Republican candidate has ever received in a midterm election in the history of the state for any office, governor, U.S. Senate, what have you. So we built a strong base, and it would be a shame, and it would be just ridiculous to toss all that hard work away, right? 800 campaign appearances, the strong base that we built, the name recognition across the state, the invaluable donor network, and the volunteer network that we have, all the excitement that we generated. Don't just toss that away, rather build on it and move forward. And especially now that the political winds are at our backs and the climate is much more favorable, that alone would carry us to victory. But we've also got a much better campaign plan that's based on experiences and lessons learned from last time around. I've done this before. It's not my first time. We're not starting from scratch. And I think it's key to consider that when you're going up against a tough incumbent like Keith Ellison, who is, formerly the Democratic National Committee deputy chair, formerly a congressman, really got a national political machine, difficult incumbent opponent, starting from scratch really just isn't a viable option. We're not starting from scratch. We've got that strong base, and we've got a strong vision for Minnesota, and we are on the path to victory. So that's kind of how I got from where I came from and all the way up to today.
Awesome, man. It was great to hear your backstory from Egan. It is unfortunate. I know a lot of people that grew up in Egan, and I know CD2 chair Jeff Schutte from there, and unfortunately that area has gone the wrong direction. Hopefully, like you said, political winds at our back. I think this is a year that us as Minnesotans can need to take advantage of that and go red. It needs to be the red wave in 2022 in this state. And it starts with you. Starts with you. Goes to the governor. Goes to the Secretary of State. Goes to the local state house, state senate, and I'm a good friend of Tyler Kistner. Hopefully, he can go and take that home for CD2. So
absolutely, yeah. CD2 is looking very good. And,
yeah,
he's a fantastic guy, a good friend, and helps out a ton on the campaign, and has for the last campaign, this campaign, known him all the way back when I was running for House. We've got great folks at CD2 and across the state, and that's so the best thing about running for office is getting to travel the whole state, meeting so many great people, activists and people from across the state in all different lines of work, and everyone right now is ready for change and ready to go back to really our founding principles and to save our state. So it's exciting to see.
So would you say the thing that a couple notes to make in comparison to your last election? First of all, it was the first time you ran for Attorney General. Second of all, it was, as you said, a little bit of a tough time to win because it is off year for the presidential. Usually doesn't go very well for the incumbent. This year, it's obviously the other way around. It's your second time around, and we have to take notice of what's happened. I think Minnesotans are at the point where what happened last summer was pretty scary. It was chaos. One of the great cities in America, I believe, is I'm born and raised in Minnesota. A great city and beautiful city is Minneapolis. It got destroyed, and it has a bad reputation. I talk to people outside of Minnesota that I know, and they're like, "Man, Minneapolis has gotten really violent. Minneapolis is crime-ridden," and that's a reputation that I don't think I don't want. And I don't think you, and I don't think everyday Americans, or maybe apolitical, maybe even lean left a little, see a problem with that. So I do agree. What would you do? Probably kind of a layup question, but you can answer it. What would you do different? What would you do drastically different than what Keith Ellison is doing right now to help slow the tide of what's happened to crime in Minneapolis and St. Paul?
Absolutely. That's really the key question. Public safety is the biggest issue out there right now, because people shouldn't need to live in fear. We've got a situation, like you said, in Minneapolis and St. Paul, where, and actually it's spreading across the state and spilling into the suburbs as well, right? With carjackings in Woodbury and in Egan, but especially in Minneapolis and St. Paul, more murders in Minneapolis than any other year. We're on pace to set a record there. St. Paul, unprecedented number of murders and other violent crimes happening there as well. And it's because Keith Ellison's lack of leadership. The Attorney General is the top legal and law enforcement official in the state, right? And we saw during the terrible riots in Minneapolis and what Keith Ellison did, and that is nothing. He did absolutely nothing. He just stood back and watched the cities burn, and then he came out a few days into the riots, and at a press conference, he took Martin Luther King Jr. out of context, misquoted him, and said that riots are the way that the unheard get heard. So essentially encouraging more violence, encouraging further lawlessness, right? And then he indicated that people would be right to direct their anger at the police. Again, encouraging further lawlessness and violence. So just exactly the opposite of what we needed, and what we needed at the time, and what I would have done were I Attorney General then, is come out before the riot started or when you see them coming, and send a strong message from the bully pulpit of the Attorney General's office that lawlessness will not be tolerated in Minnesota. That protesting is fine, peaceful protesting is fine, but as soon as you break a window or break any law, then that crosses the line, and that's not okay. And law breaking will have consequences. And then you aggressively prosecute those who break the law, support law enforcement, give them all the resources that we should have called out the National Force, and then go through and prosecute those folks that have been arrested, and send that strong message that in Minnesota, if you're going to riot, if you're going to foment violence or unrest, you will face significant consequences. And that's what Keith Ellison did not do at all. And now going forward, what we need to do, and what I will do differently than Keith Ellison, is exactly that: make sure that criminals are aggressively prosecuted. And how do we do that? We need to create a unit within the Office of the Attorney General to focus on violent crimes in particular, as well as rioting and looting and general unrest, fomenting violence. And then send those prosecutors out, take over cases from the county attorneys, especially the ones that maybe aren't doing their jobs and prosecuting criminals aggressively enough. Take over those cases, give them the support they need, but also just handle them in-house, get those prosecutions done, and push those forward, so we can send that clear and strong signal that in Minnesota, crime doesn't pay and that lawlessness will have consequences. And then we can end the lawlessness. It's not rocket science. It's actually pretty simple. But if you don't enforce the law, then the laws really aren't worth having in the first place. We've got a situation. I did a ride along with Minneapolis police a couple of weeks ago, and it was just startling to see the number of calls coming up on the screen compared to the number of squads that were available to respond to those calls. And I think at the time there were just maybe 3 squads available, and there were a dozen calls on the screen, some with wait times of 2 or more hours, right? So the police have to triage, and they can only get to the most critical situations. And a lot of people, other folks have to wait, and that is terrible. And it's because the police are understaffed and under-resourced, and that's because of Keith Ellison's war on the police. He's pouring enormous resources into the prosecution of police, but his office hasn't taken over a single case for prosecuting rioting or looting or any other violent crime at all. So his priorities are completely upside down, and he's using the office as a political weapon. He's politicized the office, and he's actually turning law into a political weapon to go after his political enemies. And that's very dangerous, because if the law becomes not something that's universally and uniformly enforced, but rather something that politicians use to target their enemies, then the rule of law itself breaks down, and all of our freedoms are at risk. So we've got to remove Keith Ellison, take the politics out of the office, simply enforce the law, build up that criminal division of the office, and then send those prosecutors out, veteran prosecutors, to make sure that criminals are being aggressively prosecuted, especially repeat offenders.
Now, quote me if I'm wrong, did Keith Ellison support the dismantling of the Minneapolis Police Department?
No, you're exactly right. He did. Yeah,
okay.
He was.
Him and Ilya Omar, correct?
Yep, and Elon Omar. That's exactly right. I mean, they were both on that and pushing it hard, advocating to dismantle the Minneapolis Police Department. And just what a ridiculous and scary and terrible proposal, right?
And you saw how the people voted. It wasn't really even that close. I was actually kind of surprised at how lopsided it was, especially in specific areas of Minneapolis when you saw how the precincts voted. That was not a very popular measure. So, and that's about the only area where that, to be in Minnesota, would that even be remotely feasible. I mean, if you tried to do that out here in Lakeville, Minnesota, where I live, run here.
That's exactly right. If that was going to pass anywhere, it would be Minneapolis, the bluest of the blue areas, and yet it lost about 56 to 44%, roughly, somewhere around. And so, see, and I think that a lot of the 44% that voted for it, a lot of those folks aren't true believers in the cause of dismantling the police. They're just kind of following along with others. So I think the public safety message and issue is really resonating, and it's gonna help us win back the suburbs. People are tired of living in fear. People don't want to. The number of kids that have been shot in Minneapolis, right, by stray bullets, unbelievable. At least 5 children, probably more than that, have been shot in the last several months. At least 2 of them have passed away tragically, including the little girl of 6 that was driving home with her mom from McDonald's eating a Happy Meal and got struck by a stray bullet and died sometime later. That is just tragic, so sad, and beyond unacceptable. That should never happen. So we need to get control of the situation and restore law and order. To do that, we need prosecutors to support the police. And the best way to support the police is to actually make sure that their job has an impact. If we send them out there, they're going out there every day, risking their lives, right, to protect us and to bring justice for crime victims. But when they arrest somebody and then they see the same person back out on the street days later or weeks later or just a few months later because charges were deferred pending something, or they weren't charged at all, or they got an easy plea bargain, something like that, that really demoralizes the police, because it feels like all of their hard work, that they're risking, has very little impact, right? Because the criminals aren't being prosecuted. So to support the police, the number one thing we need to do is to make sure that we're following through, aggressively prosecuting criminals, especially repeat offenders, getting them off the streets, making sure that law breaking has serious consequences, and then we can restore law and order. And then also use the bully pulpit of the AG's office just to send the clear message that the state of Minnesota and the Attorney General's office supports and honors and celebrates those who wear blue and for risking their lives to protect us.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate that breakdown. I have a question that would kind of be maybe a little more, you could consider it, a lot of people would interest people on probably both sides of the aisle. We obviously, unfortunately, when it comes to our correction system, there is a lot of repeat offenders. And a lot of people do not seem to get rehabilitated by the correction system because, honestly, how it's set up, it's very difficult to be rehabilitated, honestly. background was actually have an undergrad in law enforcement, and the correction model, especially the punitive model, is obviously in some cases absolutely necessary, but in other cases it kind of gets you in this vicious cycle. What would you encourage? Well, what model would you encourage to give individuals that have made mistakes to come back into society and be citizens that are effective in society? That actually the mistake of maybe possession of cocaine or a nonviolent offense that caused them to get in the position where they're incarcerated. What kind of model would you support as an attorney general to help decrease recidivism and to increase individuals coming back into society in a successful manner?
Right. Well, that's a very good question. For first-time offenders, especially when it's not a violent crime, then I think a lenient sentence is appropriate, right? And we need to make sure that there are avenues to get those folks reincorporated back into regular life and job opportunities and things like that after they've paid the price for the crime they've committed. But a lighter sentence is very appropriate for those initial offenders. Well, the vast majority of crime, violent crime especially, is committed by repeat offenders. Now, when you have a repeat offender, on the other hand, I think it's very appropriate to impose much harsher penalties as you go along. And there's importance to having a punitive element, of course, because it deters people from entering that life in the first place. Right now, we have a situation where offenders are actually committing crimes right in front of police. They know that there aren't going to be consequences, that either they won't be arrested or because the police don't have the resources, or if they are arrested, they're going to get off very easy. And so one of the officer I was doing a ride along with told me that many times criminals will just taunt the police, steal things right in front of them and break windows, what have you, and they will just tell the police that you're not going to do anything about it. So, I can just go ahead and do this. So just to end that culture of lawlessness and to eliminate that climate of lawlessness, we need to make sure that we are imposing penalties and that law breaking does have consequences, but we also need to make sure that, especially for those first-time offenders, that we're not being too harsh, right, on the first time, and that we have paths back into society to prevent recidivism and to make sure that people can be reincorporated into regular life.
Awesome. Another question that I've actually heard this in connection with Keith Ellison, and I think it probably had to do with the COVID lockdowns, what was happening in Minneapolis, but specifically, obviously, the COVID lockdowns affected businesses all over Minnesota. I mean, it was unfortunate. COVID itself has been very unfortunate, but what it did to small businesses is absolutely tragic. And you saw a couple of small businesses that actually went against the governor mandate because they felt like he was outside of his constitutional order. And you saw in the case of very near me, actually, in Lakeville, Alibi Liquor, where they took away their liquor license and actually are not allowing them to sell the place that they had the liquor license. They actually had their license taken away completely, food and liquor license. And I know that has not set well with definitely some people. The fact that he seemed to weaponize his position as attorney general to go after specifically the small business and kind of put a muzzle on them, and he's not letting go. How would you respond in a situation like what happened with Alibi Liquor? How would you respond in comparison to how Keith Ellison responded?
Absolutely. Well, so first of all, the governor's lockdown edicts and mandates, in my view, are completely unconstitutional and also illegal and beyond the powers that are set forth in Chapter 12 of the Emergency Powers Act in Minnesota statute, right? So that's the first thing. And because they are unconstitutional and, in my view, illegal, as Attorney General, I would have fought them. I would have fought those edicts. The Attorney General sits on the Executive Council with the governor, and the Executive Council approves all of the governor's executive orders. So we could have had that fight there. The Attorney General can bring lawsuits, any civil lawsuit that the Attorney General believes is in the best interest of the state, the Attorney General can bring. The Attorney General has that inherent authority. So I would have brought lawsuits against the governor or against departments that were attempting to force these unconstitutional and illegal orders, right? And so I would have taken an entirely different approach, and then I simply would have refused to enforce them because they're so blatantly illegal and unconstitutional. And the Attorney General needs to stand up for the law and for the constitutional rights of Minnesotans. And the government should not and does not have the power to go out and to bypass the legislature, impose a lockdown order, and then fine a business. The impose a fine that's just out of whole cloth with no statutory authority on a business simply for attempting to stay open and maintain their livelihoods. That is completely wrong, and it just shows you how backwards Keith Ellison's priorities have been. He's pouring enormous resources into going after businesses that violate these unconstitutional edicts, essentially. He is pouring resources into prosecutions of police, and then he steps back and does nothing about skyrocketing violent crime, right? So you're exactly right. He's unevenly enforcing the law, and he is imposing penalties on political enemies and going after folks with the law, using it as a weapon. And that is so incredibly dangerous. We need to take the politics out of the office and get back to a balanced and even rule of law.
Awesome. And I think a lot of people out there, definitely some complaints that I heard. Actually, that specific issue I heard from two different people. I was at Joe, I don't know if you knew, you probably know, Joe Biden was here. And some people are out there, some nice signs. And I actually talked to a couple different people about the Attorney General's race. And I was interviewing today, and they were like, "Oh man, remember when Keith Ellison did this to Alibi Liquor right up the road there?" And I was like, "Oh yeah, that's an issue that definitely, especially you have tons of small business owners in this state, and so that it kind of hits right at home." And I went to the city council when they tried to get back their license, and they tried to sell their establishment, and still were getting it denied, and it really was an unfortunate situation, and.
It's just wrong. I mean, it strikes at our core freedoms, right? The freedom that we all have, an inherent and constitutionally protected freedom to pursue livelihoods as we see fit, economic liberty. And that's a very important liberty. And to just deny that, especially bypassing the legislature, right? Not even considering the legislature, issuing edicts from the executive branch, and then imposing those edicts so as to interfere with and suppress people's constitutional right to earn a livelihood. That is wrong, it is unconstitutional, and I certainly would have fought that tooth and nail. And as Attorney General, I will be there to stand up for the rights of small business owners and for all Minnesotans and for all of our constitutional rights. And that's one of the key reasons I'm running. And I'm a constitutional lawyer. I've been fighting for our constitutional rights my entire legal career. So I'm the only Republican in the race that has the experience to get in there and start taking bold action on day one to not only restore law and order, but to stand up for our constitutional rights.
So that could kind of actually lead into my next question. What would you say does separate you from your main competitor? I'd say is Dennis Smith. He was obviously in the House. I think he was after you. I think he was probably a couple years after you. He's obviously running a campaign. I think, is it Lisa Torgerson? Lynn Torgerson. She's running. What differentiates you from them? What would you say that you have that specifically you'd say is a different kind of candidate? You'd be a different kind of Attorney General than them.
Well, number one, I'm a proven conservative, right? 100% pro-life, 100% pro-Second Amendment when I was in the House, and I've demonstrated my commitment to the rule of law through my career practicing constitutional law. And I'm the only person in the race that has that robust constitutional law background and also the background of litigating cases in the courtroom, but then also managing litigation. At My Pillow, I oversee a lot of different litigation, including litigation of the largest defamation case in the history of the United States. So I have the ability to manage litigation and get in there. The Office of the Attorney General is very complex, very large, 150 different attorneys in that office. 30 or 40 of them are political appointees. So I have the ability to go in there and to manage that office and to start taking the bold action that we need to take to save our state and protect our constitutional rights. And I also have the constitutional law background to know what cases to bring to fight federal overreach, how to bring those cases forward, the best strategies to do that. And so we can get in there on day one and start doing some real important work, because the Attorney General's office is answerable to the people and the people alone. And it's set up that way for a reason. So the Attorney General can protect the people and protect and enforce the law and our constitutional rights. And so I'm the only one with the experience to do that. And then secondly, I'm the only candidate that can win. And we've demonstrated our ability to put massive numbers of votes on the board, 1.15 billion votes last cycle. And we've demonstrated the ability to generate excitement around the campaign. And that excitement still prevails across Minnesota, and we're building on it now. Not starting from scratch, but building on all that excitement, on that name recognition, on the donor network. It's a night and day difference between this time and last time, calling donors and folks for financial support for the campaign. They know me. They know that we can win. They understand that a rematch is the only way to defeat Keith Ellison, who's a powerful opponent. And last time around, it was tough raising funds because give people a call the first time out, and you're running for attorney general, and they ask who you are, and there's some hangups, and it's difficult. But we've built that donor network up, so we've got that intact, and it's going quite well. We raised and spent more money than any Republican candidate has ever raised and spent in an AG race last time by a factor of 4 or 5, and this time we're on pace to double or perhaps even triple that. So it's looking quite good. So I have that experience from last time as well, going through 800 appearances and hundreds of media appearances, training with the media, and going through difficult interviews. And so, when you're going up against Keith Ellison, you really can't make a mistake, because the media will blow any mistake you make out of proportion if you're a Republican, right? They'll blow it up and they'll use it against you. Well, I have the training and the experience to not make mistakes. We're going to have a very focused message. I won't make mistakes. My opponents on the Republican side don't have that experience and don't know how to run a statewide race. In any other year, we would have won in 2018. The political wins were just that was the year we lost the state house, just nearly lost the state senate. We lost the governor's race by about around 11 points, one U.S. Senate race by about that, the other U.S. Senate race by 20 or more points. So it was a very, very tough year for our party. And if we can come within 3.5 points in that kind of climate, right, with 1.15 million votes, an unprecedented number of votes, and certainly with the political winds that are back, with all the experience, with the donors built up and the name recognition, and our improved plan based on the lessons we have learned from last time, we can absolutely win this thing. And neither of my opponents can say that. And then Dennis has his issues with his law license being suspended and on probation for 2 years, can't practice law without supervision of another attorney. That is a problem that the Democrats will attack him on, were he to be the nominee, and it would hurt the entire ticket, frankly. So he doesn't have any path to victory. And you can look that up, read about it, and it's a matter of public record. And it's important that people do get all these facts. And that's why I put it out there, to make sure that everyone has all the facts that they need to make a good decision about who to support in this race. And I'd submit that I'm the only candidate with the experience to get in there and do what needs to be done, the background to do that, and then also the only candidate who can win this thing. And we are going to win this thing. Very exciting right now. The state fair was great. Had over about 400 volunteer signups at the state fair, and we've just been racking up the volunteers and the excitement since that time. We are on the path to victory, and we are going to retire Keith Ellison from politics.
Awesome. I think that last word, I think that last phrase, I think people like to hear, especially on our side of the aisle. One question that I actually just kind of thought of organically was, you have heard some maybe veiled threats from the federal, from the Attorney General at the federal level, Merrick Garland, about possibly going after, obviously I was an individual who spoke at a school board about what's happening within the schools with the critical race theory and everything, in mask mandates and vaccine mandates and all that's going on. And the Attorney General, there's been some, what could you say, veiled threats possibly, that calling possible parents terrorists, and possibly the FBI target them. How would you as Attorney General protect parents that wanted to speak at school boards? And let's be honest, if it gets in the media, if there's enough information out there, that could deter people. It could cause apprehension for people. How could you help relieve that so people can say, hey, I want to go to the school board. I want to speak strongly against our new social studies standards and what they're putting in this. How would you make people feel at home, calm their nerves, and that you would protect them against what the federal kind of veiled threat was?
Absolutely. So Merrick Garland, the memo that they released is so terrible, indicating that they're going to sick the Department of Justice and the FBI on parents who are just expressing their views, exercising their First Amendment right to express their views on matters of very important public concern, right, at school board meetings and elsewhere, about what is being taught our children. And that is such a fundamental right, the right, first of all, parental control education, and the right to control the upbringing of your child. That's a constitutionally protected right. And also free speech, and the right to assemble, the right to express your views. And that is the free speech right is the strongest, and the protection is the strongest when you're talking about matters of public concern that impact government, and especially the upbringing of children. So we're talking about a highly protected activity under the Constitution, going to the school board and expressing views. And so for the federal government to characterize that as somehow illegal, and to try to suppress it, and to try to weaponize the Department of Justice and send them out to go after parents, is wrong, and it violates constitutional rights. if it goes too far, right? So as Attorney General, this is what I would do. If the Department of Justice goes too far and is engaging in actions that suppress the constitutional rights of parents, then we can look at bringing a lawsuit against the federal government for conspiracy to deprive someone of their constitutional rights, or simply for depriving them of their constitutional rights. And the state can bring forward those kinds of lawsuits under the inherent authority of the Attorney General of the state of Minnesota to bring forward any case on the civil side that is in the best interests of the people of Minnesota and the state of Minnesota. And I think standing up for our constitutional rights, especially the core protected rights of free speech in front of a government body that's controlling the education of our children, that is incredibly important to do. So I would actively push back, not only just use the bully pulpit of the AG's office to send the signal that we're not going to tolerate this kind of abuse of power in the state of Minnesota, but also go into federal court and stop this and push back and send that signal there as well.
Awesome, man. I like that response there, because that's something that just has come up very recently. I believe he had hearing in the Senate. I think it was probably about 3 weeks ago. And some senators that I really liked, they really went after him. It's pretty out. For me personally, because I have kids in school, I spoke at school board meetings. I was very involved in the last school board elections. That was just like, that was another level of.
Yeah, it really is. It's unthinkable even be contemplated in our country. It's
even the idea of that was disturbing, to say the least.
Un-American. It's just and wrong. So yeah, I'll fight back. Yep.
So you did a great job, man. I've gotten to know you very well. You've done a great job talking to the audience out here. If you had one final spiel to say, or kind of summarize of what your next year is going to look like, what you need from people out there, and what you plan on doing, just knock it out, and we'll finish off this interview.
Well, absolutely. So, well, thanks again for having me on. This has been fantastic. It is so important that we win this race, and I'm the only candidate that can do that. We just about won last time in a difficult political environment. Now we've got the winds at our back, and we've got to harness the energy that's out there and get this done. And we will do this. We will retire Keith Ellison from politics. And then I'm the only candidate that can restore law and order, go in there on day one and start taking bold action, promote and protect election integrity. I will investigate and prosecute voter fraud. We're going to send the message that if you commit voter fraud in Minnesota, you're going to go to jail. That's the only way to restore election integrity. We need to enforce our laws, stand up for our constitutional rights, fight vaccine mandates, fight mask mandates. I've got the experience to do all of that, the constitutional law background, the litigation management background. So I ask for everyone's support in this. I'm very excited about this race because we have a huge opportunity. We have an opportunity. A lot of bad things started in Minneapolis with the riots and then spread across the country. When we defeat Keith Ellison and win this race, not for the cause of the Republican Party, but rather for the cause of liberty and the rule of law and the Constitution, when we do that, that's going to be a great, good thing, and it's going to spread goodness all across the country, starting right here in Minnesota. And that's why I'm so excited about this race. So I ask everyone to go to your caucuses on February 1st and run for delegate and be a delegate in favor of my campaign at the state convention in May as well. And we'll just also need financial support, of course. So go to DougWardlowAG.com and you can sign up there to volunteer, and you can make financial contributions there. And we are on the path to victory, and things are looking very good. We're going to make Minnesota free again. We're going to make Minnesota safe again. And I just really appreciate the opportunity to share with your audience here all the great things we're going to do, and things are looking good.
Awesome, man. I appreciate that. Once again, this will be up on ST57 GOP on YouTube, on Facebook. It also will be on Spotify, iTunes, Stitcher, and wherever you get your podcasts. Doug Wardlow, I appreciate you coming on today. I'm looking forward to seeing what happens in the next year with your campaign, and let's win 2022.
Let's do it. Sounds good. Thanks, Tyler.
Hi, man. I appreciate it.
Take care.